Greetings. This video is being recorded on Monday, April 7th, 2025 in Japan, which means that in North America it is very late night or very early morning on April 6th or early morning April 7th. So it is shortly after Alexander Ovechkin scored his 895th regular season goal, breaking Wayne Gretzky's all-time record. And watching the highlights of that goal itself and then the ceremony that was performed at during the second period really got me thinking about hockey back in the 80s and early 90s. Hockey when it was during my childhood years. And for those of you that were born around 1980, give or take a few years, hockey as it was during this time period was very, it seemed very special. It was very stable. Of course, there have been teams that moved around before that, but for those of us born around 1980, the sport really didn't change much during our childhood years. It wasn't until the early 90s that it would start going through these profound changes, with new teams being added, started I think with the Sharks, and then there was the Senators, the Lightning, and then of course starting in I think the 93-94 season, we started to see teams leaving with the Minnesota North Stars, then the Nordiques, then the Jets, and then of course the Whalers. But one thing that has remained consistent and constant through the sport of hockey since at least during my lifetime was Gretzky being the great one. And although he did not break the record until probably I was around 13 or 14, early teenage years, frankly, when he broke the record, it didn't really mean much to me. First of all, I was quite young. I didn't pay attention to those kind of details. But more importantly, frankly, him breaking the all-time goals record was not merely, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, so to speak, in terms of establishing himself as the greatest ever, because frankly, for as long as I can remember, Gretzky was the greatest hockey player ever. So that he finally broke the record to make it somehow official really didn't mean much. But now Alexander Ovechkin has broken that record, and that is one of the last constants that remained in hockey, and that has been challenged now. Not that Gretzky is the greatest ever. I think most people will continue to say that he is the greatest ever when you take a look at the points and other records that he holds. But in terms of goals, what an iconic record to have broken. And so I pulled out this old sticker album here, and speaking of Gretzky, we see the Oilers there, the old players there. I wanted to go through this old album here and just kind of highlight what I'm talking about, the way that the sport has changed. Of course, the uniforms have changed. You see the Los Angeles Kings here with the new logo, but the old uniform showing in the sticker here. The sport has changed so much in my lifetime. I think more than any other of the majors pro sports in North America. There's nothing like it in basketball, baseball, or football. I mean, hockey starting in 1980 until about 91 was pretty stable. I know that there were a few big changes right before I was born. I think the New Jersey Devils were created, or I think they moved from another city. The Calgary Flames, I think, had moved from Atlanta. And so there were a few changes, but during my childhood years, there were no big changes. And here we come to one of the biggest changes that I can remember, which is, of course, when teams began to leave, and it was the North Stars that were first. And I'm just doing this off the top of my head here. This is just purely from my memory. So if I get it wrong, please let me know in the comments. I think it was in the 93-94 season that Minnesota moved to Dallas. So when I look at these defunct organizations, I always get a bit nostalgic. The old North Stars. I know that Minnesota, of course, now has the Wild. But of course, they will never be the North Stars. Here we see the St. Louis Blues. I was a little surprised to see a photo of Doug Gilmour here. I remember him being a much nastier player, but in this photo here, he actually looks like a regular nice guy. Anyway, so the sport, of course, has changed tremendously, and that's just the nature of this kind of business. There's no surprise there. But for those of us that have any kind of, I don't know what I describe it as, maybe an emotional attachment to the sport when you were a kid, it meant a lot. It was something that you played, you watched, you're a big fan. When your favorite team was playing, if they made the playoffs, if they didn't, you still followed it and all the big stars. So as part of your childhood, I think it's a pretty big thing to look back on and see that it has changed so dramatically. I know that other sports have had some changes as well. I know that in baseball there are a few expansion teams. The Montreal Expos moved to Washington D.C., and then of course the Oakland A's will be moving to Las Vegas in the next in about 2 years or something like that. I don't remember the exact details. In football, I had a few teams that moved. Of course, the Browns and the Houston Oilers. Both cities ended up with a franchise again, so I guess it all worked out. But hockey, it was just it's been wild how many franchises have moved. And here we see as well, the uniforms have changed so dramatically, although that's not that unusual for, most sports. Times change, things get updated. But in hockey, the logos have changed dramatically. We see here with the Canucks, for instance. I'm not sure how I feel about this logo, honestly, in comparison with the new one, but, it just takes you back. I know that it is a pretty ugly uniform, but oh well. That brings us to the Winnipeg Jets, another defunct organization and one of the few cities to regain a lost franchise. I really like this logo. I think as a child, it's just so cool, right? I mean, it's got, a jet aircraft in the logo. I mean, I've never been to Winnipeg. I'm probably never going to go to Winnipeg, but I always had a special attachment to this team simply because of that very cool logo. And Dale Hawerchuk was such a classy player, a great offensive threat as well, but just a really classy player as well. So he was a kind of a likable guy and made the team a bit likable. Not that I could watch them that often, but overall, it was a cool team and a sad team to see move. Although, at least Arizona got a team out of it, which unfortunately ended up finally coming to an end last season. So we see here the Stanley Cup playoffs from 1988, and I remember this quite well because the only thing that I remember really that stands out in my mind was that very strange game where the Boston Garden got fogged out, and I think the game was canceled. So actually, I stand corrected. I don't remember it that well, but it also takes you back looking at the Clarence Campbell trophy and then the Prince of Wales trophy. My goodness, the league certainly has changed, right? The Prince of Wales and the Clarence Campbell trophies now it's just, I think, the Eastern Conference, Western Conference. And, of course, the Edmonton Oilers won the Stanley Cup that year. Speaking of Wayne Gretzky, this was this his fourth and final cup? I believe this might have been the fourth and final cup with the Edmonton Oilers and his final cup in his career. Of course, the Conn Smythe Trophy winner, no surprise. Gretzky was really in his prime around this time, although I believe in this season Mario Lemieux actually beat him in terms of the goals and points. But in the playoffs, Wayne Gretzky was absolutely dominant, as he had been for most of the decade. Some highlights here. And, speaking of nostalgia and looking back at just the very nature of this particular artifact here, the sticker book, if you remember that, growing up in the 80s, man, this was a real project. I mean, in this particular sticker book, there are probably somewhere around 400 stickers, so I can only imagine how many duplicates I had to to go through before finally completing this whole thing. Anyways, looking back, here's good old Cam Neely. Boy, that's unfortunate about the way his career was cut short, but sure do like him in the movies. For those of you who remember, perhaps you'll know. Who's the dead man who hit me with the salt shaker? Kick his ass, Seabass! I hope you know which movie I'm referencing. Great performance on his part there, but Boston Bruins really were disappointing that year, of course, after such a great season to end up getting swept in the finals. Ray Bourque, another classy player, terrific, one of the best defensemen all time. So that was an unfortunate way to end. Of course, he did get that cup with Colorado a few years later. The Buffalo Sabres, another organization that really has kind of had a rough go of it. The city of Buffalo in general has, of course, had a rough sporting history with the, of course, Buffalo Bills going to the Super Bowl 4 seasons in a row and not winning. And I'm sure Buffalo Sabres fans will remember the Stanley Cup Finals against the Dallas Stars and the controversy of the foot in the crease that perhaps Dallas should have had a goal disallowed in overtime. We won't get into that here. Oh, this is perhaps one of the most iconic defunct sports organizations, at least for me. When I see the Hartford Whalers, I can't help but feel a certain sinking feeling in my heart, because I think they just symbolize I don't know, for me, they really symbolize the hockey of this time period. And when they moved to Carolina, I think that kind of just was really the last straw at this point. Once they left, it was really the dawn of a new NHL and a much more modern one. So when I look at this, I see a very, very kind of sad memory here. And there's some good players here. We see Ron Francis, Sylvain Turgeon, Mike Liut was pretty good. Dave Babbage was a solid defender. Sylvain Cote. These Whalers, they just couldn't quite get it together to make a good playoff run. Speaking of the Whalers not making a successful playoff run, it comes down to the Montreal Canadiens. I mean, the Montreal Canadiens may be single-handedly most responsible for keeping the Whalers down. I think the Whalers made the playoffs only 8 times, and 5 of those times they were eliminated by Montreal. So it's kind of fitting that they come right after the Whalers here. And boy, the Canadiens, what a terrific organization. Of course, the most successful NHL franchise in history. We got some tough players here. We got Claude Lemieux, a really unpopular player for certainly the Detroit Red Wings and many teams that he played against. We got Patrick Waugh, arguably the greatest goalie of all time. Guy Carbonneau, what a great defensive forward. I think he helped the Dallas Stars win a Stanley Cup. So this was a great team that I think would end up going to the Stanley Cup Finals the following year, and they lost to the Calgary Flames in 1989, if I remember correctly. And that brings us to the New Jersey Devils. Now, their logo has been quite consistent through the years. I know that now they have a black ring with the I think it's a little bit more modern, it's a little bit more edgy, but it's very strange because when I see this logo, it almost looks like one of these defunct hockey organizations. This uniform is just so 80s with the green pants, the green ring around that New Jersey Devils logo. It's it just really takes me back. I mean, it was just it was a very, like I said, it's just such a very 80s uniform. Sean Burke, great career, great goalie. I believe he ended up with Vancouver when they were in the 94 Stanley Cup Finals, if I remember correctly. The New York Islanders, boy, they certainly had a very dramatic turn of events where in the early 80s they were just unstoppable. Did they win 4 Stanley Cups in a row, or they won 4 Stanley Cups in 5 years or something like that? What an incredible run they had. Second half of the 80s, they kind of slipped into a little bit less relevance in terms of the Stanley Cup chase, but they still had Brian Trottier here, I think the last major figure from those Stanley Cup years. Pat LaFontaine getting started on his career, unfortunately cut short due to concussions. And the New York Rangers. Now, here's an organization that obviously the logo has really not changed much, certainly not during my lifetime, and as far as I can tell, they maintained the logo for decades before I was even born, so that's kind of cool to see this consistency. But it's kind of surprising to see the organization here is, I don't recognize many of these names, honestly. I mean, of course, Brian Leetch, John Van Beesbrook, who I think ended up with Florida the year that they went to the Stanley Cup Finals, but Thomas Sandstrom, but not too many familiar names there. The Philadelphia Flyers, a solid team during this season. Of course, they're just coming off of the Stanley Cup run the previous year. Ron Hextall, one of the most fiery players in history, probably. Mark Howe, Jell Samuelson, one of the biggest players in history. I'm not sure if he's taller than Zdeno Chara, but had to be pretty close to it. Rick Tocchet, I think, is now coaching the Vancouver Canucks. So it is funny to see some of these names and see where they are now. The Pittsburgh Penguins were, of course, a bit quiet at this time, I think. I'm not sure that they were that successful in the playoffs yet, but of course they had Mario Lemieux, who was just absolutely lighting up the NHL, shockingly taking over Gretzky's top spot in the points and goals, and was just such a phenomenal player coming into the league around this time. Paul Coffey, one of Gretzky's former teammates, anchoring that Pittsburgh defense, and the Stanley Cups that were about to come. The Quebec Nordiques, another one of these defunct organizations that when I see the logo, my heart sinks a little bit, thinking back to the old days of hockey. Very cool logo, very, very good franchise. It's truly unfortunate that they just couldn't quite get that winning team together before they made the move to Colorado. They obviously were very close. They had a very good team here. Michel Goulet, Anton Stastny, Peter Stastny. This was a solid team. I believe it was in 1993 that they were eliminated by the Montreal Canadiens. They actually had a 2-game lead on them. They went to overtime in Game 3. They were in a great position to win that series, and instead Montreal ended up storming back, winning 4 in a row, and went on to win the Stanley Cup. We can't help but wonder if they had beaten the Canadiens, if they would have had a shot at winning the Cup that year, and how different things might have turned out for that franchise. Instead, they went on to leave, and then the star of the Canadiens, Patrick Roy, ends up joining them, and they win the Stanley Cup in Colorado, so that must have really hurt the Quebec fans. That brings us to the Washington Capitals, and what a good way to end this album, because of course we started talking about Alex Ovechkin beating Wayne Gretzky's record, and these Capitals were of course very different, but look at this defense back then. Kevin Hatcher, Rod Langway, and Scott Stevens. My goodness, talk about 3 tough guys. If they're on 3 separate lines, I mean, imagine having to go out and face one of them at all times. And you've got Dale Hunter too. Man, there's obviously a controversial player. I'll remember him best for the late hit that he had after, I can't remember which Islanders player had scored, and he drilled him into the boards and caused, I think, a pretty serious injury that required surgery. Was it Pierre Turgeon, or I can't remember who it was that was injured, but that was a real nasty, dirty play, obviously. And Scott Stevens, of course, will be well remembered for the hit on Lindros and the hit on Paul Correa. So that just about does it here. This is a funny part of the album at the end here, and a great way to learn some French if you want to become a little bit more bilingual, at least in hockey. You got signaux et règle, and you got some funny names here for, boy, holding certainly becomes long, huh? Instead of holding, it becomes avoir retenu, and interference, obstruction, high sticking, avoir brandi le bâton. So you can learn some French there. Don't rely on my pronunciation, of course. Anyway, so that just about does it for this video. So in conclusion, I just want to bring it back to what we started out with, which was, of course, Alex Ovechkin beating Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. As I said, it's it was a little bit of an emotional moment, simply because I couldn't help but think, wow, this is one of the last vestiges of the old hockey that I remember changing once again. Wayne Gretzky, as I said, for the longest time, I mean, Wayne Gretzky was synonymous with hockey. He was just the greatest ever. I mean, by the time that I could really understand and follow along with hockey, it was probably like around, 3 or 4 years old, and already Wayne Gretzky was the great one, was the greatest. And certainly by the time we became a little bit more mature kids, by the late 80s, it was just so established. Wayne Gretzky is the greatest ever. And as I said, when he finally officially broke all those records, it didn't really mean anything because it was so clear that he was the greatest ever. And so there wasn't much, in my mind, it really didn't mean all that much. It was just like, yeah, of course he's the greatest. It was just so obvious that he was eventually going to own every single record. So in that sense, I was excited keeping track of Alex Ovechkin's progress. Certainly for the last couple seasons, it became clear that, oh, wow, this might actually happen. I remember about 5 years ago, it seemed like a bit fanciful. It didn't seem like, probably he's going to slow down and he's going to fall a bit short. But, about 2 years ago, I realized, oh my goodness, he's got a real shot at this. So to see it happen, at least this time, I feel that I'm mature enough to appreciate the truly historic nature of this record. So it's, it's an amazing thing. It's great that Alex Ovechkin broke the record. I still believe that Wayne Gretzky is the greatest to ever play the game, but hats off to Alex Ovechkin. He is the greatest sniper ever. He is the greatest regular season goal scorer, and I kind of look forward to seeing exactly where he's going to end up. I'm going to predict somewhere probably around 950-ish. Anyhow, that just about does it for this video. Thank you for watching.